Hello, I'm Dan L., jBASE Technical Engineer, and I'm going to go over staging a Linux box for jBASE today. We're going to start with Red Hat or CentOS Linux 7, and the machine that we're working with is already staged with the packages needed and the installation type that's needed. All that will be a part of the original document that you'll get, and it will be step by step, and you'll be able to check mark through those. Because it's simply following the bouncing ball, I'm not going to go over that during this recording, but we're going to start at the point where you've downloaded your jBASE bin, which is how we do the install of the jBASE, and we're going to start running that install and then set up the environment from that point forward. So on this machine, I'm going to log in as root with whatever password. That as your root password when you set it up. And if I look at my directory here, I've got a Linux underscore jBASE 5.7.0, which is the release that we're working with here. That's the way the release will look when you get it in from the download site. And we're going to step through doing the actual installation of that. So in order to run this, we simply run the bash command, the bash shell, and then if I put in li and just hit tab because I'm at the bash shell already, it will fill in that whole line for you. And then I'll hit enter, and that'll start running the automated installation. We're not going to do much different than the actual defaults of the installation, but I will go over those as we run across them. So at this point we press enter to start. Are we outside or within the EU? We're doing it here in the States, so it's O for outside, and then we can go through the entire licensing agreement if you want to look at it, or if we hit Q, it takes us to the accepting yes or no. So we will accept that license agreement, and now we're at the install type, and we're going to do an advanced install because we're going to not take the exact defaults of the installation. So the release directory, the only things that we're going to be changing, and they are documented in the, like I said, in the step-by-step instructions that you'll get, are we'll make sure that the user ID is what you want it to be, that the group ID is what you want it to be. The main thing change is the data directory, because by default we put it in a different place than what I suggest for staging this Linux box. And then we will be using port-based locks. So you'll see as we go through the installation. So I'm going to press enter here. Is that okay? You have to put a Y for yes. Symbolic link, that will make it opt jBASE current version. That will just always be where your release is, regardless of where you actually load it. You will always know that that's where it's located. Is that correct? Yes. The user ID is going to be jBASE ADM, so that's going to be the administrator of your jBASE system. You can use this. I would advise having this on your system. If at a later point you want to disable that user, that's fine, but this just makes it so you've got you can follow the document exactly and know that you have an administrative user, and how you can set up certain privileges and etc. will be gone over in this. So we're going to go with that default of jBASE ADM. So yes, we want to create it. It becomes a new user. Give it a password, and that's whatever password you want to put in there. And then your user group, or your group for jBASE is going to be jBASE. And we'll say yes there. Now here, it's going to create a jBASE ADM account for administrative functions. That's very similar to, if you're on D3, your DM account. If you're coming from like one of the older versions of PIC, like R83 or Ultimate or those type of things, it's going to be your sysprog account, but it's going to be that base account where you know that you can do administrative functions and etc. Then number 2 is we'll create a system file to organize those accounts. So jBASE ADM will be in that system file. We're going to start the JDLS distributed locking service. That's a service that handles your locking, and it allows you to lock directories and etc. And it's much faster than the Unix or the Linux native. And then your JRCS remote connectivity is it's just that. It's being able to get it remotely into your machine, and we use that for some certain processes. And then we will initialize the print spooler so you'll be able to print when you're done. So we can do it in for next. Now this is where it says database directory, and this is where we default to opt jBASE. We're going to make that /, I'm making it /dbms. It has to be an existing directory. So again, this is in the document. It will say that you should have done a make dir of this directory before you did the install, or this could actually be, and quite often is, a separate file system. So you want your database to be under a specific file system under Linux. That gets more into the Linux administration and etc. If you're not all that worried about that type of thing, and if you don't have a Linux administrator, you probably aren't all that worried about that type of thing. Linux by default will create just a large disk space, and this will just be a directory within it. So we're going to put /dbms. It says it doesn't exist, so please enter a valid directory. So I'm going to go ahead and call up a separate session and create that. So we will have a Linux directory called that we can make this. So on another terminal, I'm just doing a make dir -m777 space /dbms. And now we have that, and it's existing. So if I come back to our screen here, I do /dbms, it will now see that it exists out there. It says, is that okay? Yes, it is. So now we put it in an evaluation license. Again, you'll get that with your install. You'll get a key that needs to be put in. It's a very long and painful key, so you'll probably want to do a cut and paste off of the document that you have that comes with it. That's what we're going to do. Copy. We're going to say we have an evaluation license, and paste, and there's that evaluation license. So now we've got an evaluation license out there. If this was your live installation, you would just be putting in the system license, and then you can have multi-sessions and web licenses and that type of thing you want to discuss with the salespeople and the engineer that you're buying the jBASE from. But for our test here, we're just going to set up an evaluation license. So we'll do in for next. The port number for JRCS, again, if you have a Linux administrator, they may have a specific port you want to run it on. We default to 8236, so we can just take that and we put in a Y for yes. Will it use port-based locking? Yes, it will. And now we just begin our installation. So it will go out and find out any required dependencies, any packages that we may have forgotten, or if new packages have been added that are needed for this version of jBASE that weren't needed for earlier ones. This will automatically go out using Yum, using the package manager, and install all the packages that are needed for jBASE. Once the packages are installed, then it will actually do the jBASE install. And that jBASE install will go into the directory we told it, which we took the default, which is /opt/jbase/5.7.0, because that's the release that we're installing. And then when it's referred to in the environment variable for jBASE, which is the jbc release dir, it will always refer to the what we call symbolic link to that 5.7.0, which is always going to be called current version. So then all of your scripts, all of anything that you do that you want to work with jBASE, you will actually create your links to /op/jbase/current version. And then if jBASE 5.8 comes out, or 5.9, or jBASE 6, then the only thing that will change is the actual location of that. So you can have your old version of jBASE still loaded on the machine. The new version will be given the 5.8 or 5.9 or 6.0 type of notation. And then you'll just simply change the symbolic link or the pointer to it to be current version, so that you're always looking at whatever your current version is. So we've done it. We've got it in there, and now would we like to log into jBASE ADM? And if we say yes, we've got our jBASE machine. So this is, if I was to list MD, looks very familiar to what you see on your current box. If I do a list U, I will see the users on the box. So we got one user, and it happens to be me. So we can now we are truly a jBASE box. So now the thing is, how did that happen, and what are the environment variables and etc. that needed to be set? So what we're going to do, the next part is the important part of staging the machine, and that is setting up the environment in a script. So we're going to create a place for those scripts, and if we were to do a pwd here for print working directory, we'll see that we are in /dbms/jBASE ADM. So that's that jBASE account that we were talking about. This is like your sysprog account. We're going to do a directory of things that will go into the .profile, which is kind of like, if you were looking at the DOS world, it's kind of like the old auto-exec bat. And that's what Linux uses in order to know what your original environment is. It's called the .profile or .bash_profile. So we're going to alter that .profile so that it's ready for your jBASE users to use. And the easiest way for us to do that is to use what's called sourcing. In Linux, in PIC or in BASIC, you would be used to includes. So it's very similar to an include. So rather than writing, just like you would not write multiple programs with the exact same code, you would do an include and then include it in. If you've got 200 users, you don't want to have 200 separate .profiles, or similar to your auto-exec bats. You would want to have one and be able to include that into all 100 users. If there's minor variations, that could be done after the fact, but most of the environment is going to be the same for everybody on the machine. So we're going to make a directory to hold those profiles, and it's going to be dbms, which is where our base of our machine is, and we're just going to call it the profile source, where the profile stuff is. And I'm going to do a -m777, which is going to give it full open permissions at this point. We'll worry about changing permissions once we've got the machine up and running and figure out how we want to administer that. But this just makes it so we won't have any problems with our permissions originally. So now we've got a profile source out there. We're going to go ahead and edit that include I was telling you about, or in the world of Linux it would be called the source file. So we're going to vid dbms profile source jBASE environment. So it's going to be called the jBASE environment. So it's things that people that need to use jBASE, this is the environment they're going to use. Now, I am not this quick of a typist, so I'm going to be using cut and paste. but we will go over it after I cut and paste it in line by line, so you get an idea of what we're doing with this profile. It's not ultra lengthy, but it does take into account a lot of different things that we've run into during our conversions, and so it may have extra code you won't necessarily use, but it won't hurt anything. It'll be there, and you can take a look at how we've done different scenarios, different things that we've run across. So I'm going to paste this in. So there's my quick typing. Got my whole script in here, and I don't see the very beginning. Oh, there it is. Okay. So this kind of explains it. And it looked like it cut it off. So let me make sure we got it right. jBASE release tour should be after this. It is cutting off on me, so let me make sure that's right. So we've got it written out there. I'm going to just change my screen size slightly. Settings, because I normally go with a 50 columns, and I think it's just too much to show on this. So we're going to make it 24, what people are kind of used to. And we'll reset this. We'll VI it again just so you can see what I'm talking about. So here's the actual script. Not sure my screen's going to work. Let's see. We'll go line by line. So what I was saying is this will be sourced into everybody's dot profile. The dot profile is going to be a very simple, almost, it's really two actual usable lines of information. One is this, and then the other one is just simply the command that we're running under jBASE. So this is the major script, and I just want to go over this and why we did the way we do it. The very first thing you're going to notice is that we have three different environment variables that people will be doing different things with. The number one, of course, is your jBASE data dir. Where is your data? And this is not a typical jBASE environment variable. It's one that's used throughout this script. It's not really a part of the jBASE release, but I put it here so that if you decided that you were going to use something other than /dbms, you could have multiple databases on your system, and this would just, if you don't set that, we're going to assume it's /dbms. So the simplest way is if you don't set any of these things, these are the defaults they're going to take. If you don't set the jBASE data dir, we're going to assume it's /dbms. If you don't set jBC emulate before you call this to, even if you set it to jBASE because you don't want to change the emulation from what jBASE does, or it may be D3, or it may be Universe, or it may be Reality. If you don't set one of these inside this script currently, it sets it to D3. Then the next thing is the jBC release dir, and the reason we allow you to change that is because for the most part everybody's going to be running on the current release. One of the nice things about jBASE is if a new release comes out and you want to test it against your live database for reporting purposes and that type of thing, you could have a person log in and actually be using the new release. And the only change that would need to be done is in their dot profile, you would set their jBC release dir to, instead of the symbolic link to the current version, you would set it to that newer version. So let's say jBASE 5.8 comes out, and you want to see if 5.8 now handles that new fancy thing you wanted to do with the report. You could actually, in a user, have jBC release dir equals /op/jbase/5.8.0, and then that person would be running the new version, and everything else would be the same. They would still go to the same database. They would still get the same information. It would just be, they would be running the newer release. So that's why we allow you to change that. So what we're doing is we look to see if it's set. If you set it to something, we'll use that. If you don't set it to something, we're going to set it, in this case, the datadir to /dbms. Then the next one would be, if you don't set jbc emulate, then we're going to set it to D3. If you don't set the jbc release dir, we're going to set it to the jbc release dir /op/jbase/current version. Then we do some things like the umask. Umask is your permissions, and this was we touched on that just a little, that we were leaving it wide open for now. What doing a 002 does is it makes it so that people other than jBASE people other that are not in the jBASE group, if they have a 002 umask, they'll be able to see the jBASE stuff, but they will not be able to alter it. So again, that would be something you could go over with the Linux administrator, but this will probably work for most people. That's usually what the default is for Linux. The next thing is the ignore EOF equal 999. What that does is, if you see the line above, it says it quits and Control D for exit. It makes it so if you accidentally hit Control D, and those people that are coming from D3 probably will accidentally hit Control D, and they'll expect it to go up in the stack, and what it's going to do is log you out, because that's what the default thing for Linux is to do. On a Control D, it exits you out. By setting this, you set it to ignore that Control D, so it doesn't do anything. Then the only other thing is the erase being a Control H means that when you hit backspace, it does clear the character. Again, the default on not on jBASE, but on Linux is normally a delete that doesn't erase. And then the suspend and quit are just two functions that you normally are not going to use, and that just disables those. Again, any questions on that type of thing you could get with a Linux administrator, but these are just defaults that most people are going to use. So now we set all the other variables needed for jBASE. There aren't that many variables in jBASE. I've always said jBASE just needs to know where is jBASE. It needs to know where are your programs, where are your subroutines, and where is your data. So that's what we're going to be setting in the next few lines here. So the jbc global dir is always going to be set equal to the jbc release dir, and that's just setting your database name and that type of thing. It's for jBASE administration. Your path is where are your programs. So right now we're telling Linux, okay, the programs out there for jBASE are under jbc release dir /bin. In other words, opt jBASE current version /bin is going to hold all the jBASE verbs. jBASE verbs are things like list you and who and where. Then where are the subroutines that are used by the jBASE release itself? And those are in LD library path. They're called shared object items. And they're the C routines, which are very similar to basic subroutines. Then where is your system file? Because jBASE doesn't need a system file, and because you could put it anywhere, this is just simply saying we put the system file under the datadir /system. In the spooler directory, where you have your spooler, again, we put it under that datadir /jspooler. Now remember, datadir was /dbms because we set that up at the top. Most systems will want to use ports to start in a predefined range. So, in other words, your jbc port number equals 1. I don't know where root came from. I must have accidentally typed that in my document, so let me delete that out. In other words, what port numbers do you want people to take when they log into the system? So the first person in the system will get port 1, and the second one will get 2, and etc. Of a range from 1 to 500 by default on this in this profile source. Then the next thing says, do you want to be able to queue points to queue points? Again, I'm assuming coming from D3, people are going to want to do that. So we're going to set that to 1. And then the last thing is, if you do a Z and a program in D3 or in a lot of the multi-value packages, it will go ahead and run that in background. By default, jBASE will run it in background, but it will queue them up one behind the other. By saying this, it doesn't queue them up, so it allows you to run multiple background jobs at the same time, which is probably the way most people are going to want to set that. So that's just some environment variables that are extra that, as you've learned, jBASE is very flexible, and I'm just trying to make it what, in general, most people that are coming from a multi-value environment are going to be expecting. So we default the user environment if there's no log2 run. So in other words, if you come into the system and you don't say log2 a specific account, well, where do you want to start? So we're going to assume you want to start in dbms, and that you're going to want to have the log name of jBASE ADM, and you're going to want to use the MD, and this should have been, let me change this, it will be changed in the document when you get it, but this would be jBASE. Want to start in the jBASE ADM account. Your name will be jBASE ADM. You'll start with that MD. You will start with the programs that were compiled and cataloged in jBASE ADM. You will start with the subroutines that were compiled and cataloged in the lib for jBASE ADM. And then, so this is where they're going to go when you catalog them, is your dev bin and your dev lib. And this is going to be where they're coming from. So if I catalog a program, I'm running it from here. If I catalog a subroutine, I'm running it from the JBC object list. So that's where it catalogs to, where it runs from, which could be separate, but in this case they're the same. And then the JEDI file path is going to be, where's your data? And that's going to always be where you're currently at. If it's not where you're currently at, it's going to look in jBASE, in the DBMS jBASE ADM, what we set as home up here. So now we've got our default environment set up. So we're going to export those environment variables that we set. So all the environment variables that got set up here are going to be exported here. Exporting means that they can be used in the environment after this script gets done. So once these things are set, you can at any time type in echo $, in one of these variables, and it'll tell you what the value of that is. It's kind of like a common in the world of PIC basic. So those will be set, and you'll be able to see what they are because we've exported them. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a stack and then set the prompt. With jBASE 5.7, you can set what your prompt looks like, which is going to be the user ID. I can't remember exactly what these variables are. This is the account. This is the type of stack. So it'll say JSH, jBASE ADM, DANL, and then when it's a secondary stack, in other words, you did a select and then you're now waiting for the command that comes after it, it'll do two greater than signs. So it's very similar to what you come from on your multi-value box. And then once we've set the prompt, then we're going to set that the command is by username. So you just put in the word username, and that it can store up to 150,000 commands. If you needed more, you can put another 0 on there. If you think that's too much, you can make it smaller, but it's going to hold the last 150,000 commands that user Bob typed in. So every time you come back in, your stack will hold the commands from the last time that you were in. So now we're getting into a little bit trickier of and why we have these profile sources. Am I a multi-user session? So a multi-session user. We have two different types of licenses in jBASE, single and we have multi-user. If you have multi-user, there are different ways to set that. One of the easiest, though, is to export this jBASE dynamic multi-session equals 1. What we're doing here is allowing you in that DBMS profile source to just have a record called multi-session users, and if you put an ID in that, it's going to be one of the people that can do multi-session. So if Bob gets multi-session, you can, in your DBMS profile source multi-session users item, which you could ED that. You could say ED space / DBMS / profile source space multi-session users. It's a Linux item, but jBASE will let you edit that Linux item. And you would just insert a new name. So if Jim comes in and Jim is a multi-session user, you put Jim in there. Then what this does is it just looks and it says, oh, okay, I see Jim in here. He's a multi-session user. If he is, I'll say he is. So jBASE will now allow him to have up to 10 sessions on his port. And rather than hard coding that in his profile, or rather than hard coding it, we have a different way of setting the multi-sessions. You can do it this way. And like I said, you guys can go over this and look at this later, but I just kind of want to roughly explain it right up front. Another thing that a lot of people do is they'll want port number ranges for users. So in other words, Bob can use ports 1 to 4, and Jim uses 5 to 10, and da-da-da-da. So this allows that same type of thing. Again, you edit an item called port nose, and in this case, you put in user space and then what ports he can use. So if Bob can use ports 1 to 4, you put Bob space 1-4. If Jim can use 5 to 10, then it would be Jim space 5-10. And then it will set the range of port numbers that that person uses based on their name. So that's what we're doing here. Another thing that we found was, especially with the Accuterm, is you could set the terminal type, and in it you can have it specifically say what the echo back is for that. So let me show you that real quick. So if I go up here to Tools and Settings, and we look at the terminal, we'll see the host terminal type. And the answer back, we could say VT220_100, and that would say on this port, when the person logs in with this version of Accuterm, and they can change it right here on their menu, they'll use port 100, or they could use 100 through 110. So if you put that in there, then what this piece of code is doing is looking at that and cutting out the port number, the range that you gave, and assigning that. If you give it a single port, it will assign extra ports in case the person needed them. So if you gave them -100, it would give them 2100, 3100, and 4100. So you can specify one specific port, and it'll give them extra ports in case those extra ports were needed. And that's the kind of thing. Those are some of the things that we've run into with people. There could be other types of things that you'd want to add to these scripts, and you can always contact the jBASE tech support, and we can help you with that. But this is just a very normal version of what you'd see in your environment setup. So we're going to go ahead and quit out of this. Well, I'll right quit because I think I made a minor little change. And now that we've set up that environment source, the last thing that we'll want to do, as far as these profile sources go, is we'll want to set up what the user will have. So in other words, if Bob is a jBASE user, how does he use this? And here's how he'll use that. So I'm going to vi/dbms/profile source/user.profile, because this is going to be the user profile that we'll use for everybody. And again, I'm just going to cut and paste, but this one's much smaller, because you'll find that all we do in this is set up the environment. Go find what I'm doing here. Copy. This will actually show on screen. So that's all we're going to do is we'll place this in the user's directory as their .profile. So bash allows for a .bash profile underscore profile. If that exists, it should just be deleted and use this, write this as the .profile. But what this is going to do, it's going to be set as the .profile. It will set up the environment for the user using that script that we came up with. And then the only thing that actually you want to have happen for your jBASE users is when they come in, you want them to be able to log to an account. So this will exec the word log to. It'll run the log2 program, and since it doesn't have an account name there, it'll just set there at an account name and ask them for what account they want to log into. If everybody in your organization logs into the same account, you could change this to just have maybe order entry for the account, and it would actually log them into order entry when they first came in. So we're just going to leave it right now for log2. So now we've got our two items in the jBASE profile source, the jBASE environment and the user profile. So that's what will be used to create users from now on to be able to log into your system. So I'm going to go ahead and create a user. Which makes me root. Minus, it's going to ask for the root password. So that's that root password we had. So now that I'm its root, I can go ahead and do a user add. User add DNL. Simplest version of adding a user. So now go in as DNL. ls minus LA, you'll see that .bash underscore profile I was telling you about. That's the one that Linux is going to default to. So we're going to remove that one. And we're going to copy the one that's in dbms profile source. User.profile. QR. I have permission problems. All right, we'll change the permissions. Just open it wide open for everybody. CP, I could just probably do an up arrow. CP, and we don't have. Okay. Profile. We'll do it as root source. Root. We'll probably have to change it because it can't read it. So H. Or that would make it what's standard for the .bash profile. chmod. The wrong user, and so phone is going to be DNL colon jBASE. And Now I remember I forgot to DNL. When I just created it with a user add space DNL, the problem with that is it would have created a group called DNL, and then he wouldn't be a part of the jBASE group. So I should have, when I did the user add, there is one minor option I should have used, and that would have been the -G space jBASE. Because I didn't do it when I created the user, I used user mod to modify that user and add them to the jBASE group. So now DNL is a member of the jBASE group. And because I am a member of the jBASE group, if I do an ls-la of my the dot profile here in the DNL directory, you'll see that it's owned by DNL, who is a member of the jBASE group, and DNL can read and write it, and anybody else in the jBASE group can only read it. So that's the way it should be. Now when I SU to DNL, it asks me for my account name. So that's where I can type in jBASE ADM. And voila, we are in as DNL. If I do my JDiag, you'll see the different things that come up. Those environment variables that we set. So our port number is 1 to 500. Our release dir is the op jBASE current version. Our data dir is /dbms. Our home is this jBASE ADM. The MD that we use is, since we're in that account, is jBASE ADM/MD. Where's the system file? It's back one level. It's under DBMS called system. The release information is this. The spooler is located here. The emulation we're running is jBASE. So it just gives you an idea of the different settings that are automatically set when we logged in now. And that's because we used that jBASE_env, and that was sourced into this user's profile. So if I was to exit and cat the dot profile again, the only command really in the dot profile that set up the environment was using this. So if we decide to change that environment, we change it here. We don't change it in the 100 different users. And all 100 users will have this sourced into their environment, and then they'll exec a log to. And we will also in the document go over how to make this automatically happen when you do user adds. Now you've got your machine up and running, and that is pretty much ready to run your jBASE. So that's the end of this session. I thank you for watching this session and learning a little about staging your Linux box for jBASE. If you have any other questions, please come to the website.